The Galactic Empire's warships descended upon the human colony of Epsilon 9 like a swarm of locusts, their sleek, obsidian hulls blotting out the stars. The colony, a bustling hub of innovation and trade nestled on the edge of the Orion Arm, had no warning. One moment, the skies were clear. The next, they were filled with the deafening roar of ion engines and the blinding flash of plasma cannons. The Empire's message was clear. Resistance was futile, and humanity was nothing more than an inconvenience to their galactic dominion. Captain Elias Voss stood on the observation deck of the colony's central hub, his hands clenched into fists as he watched the devastation unfold. He was a man of discipline, his military background etched into the lines of his face and the rigid set of his shoulders. Beside him, Dr. Lyra Chun, the colony's chief scientist, gripped the railing so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her mind, usually a whirlwind of equations and hypotheses, was now consumed by a single, unshakable thought. They're going to kill us all. We need to evacuate, Elias said, his voice steady despite the chaos. Now. Lyra shook her head, her dark hair whipping around her face as another explosion rocked the building. The shuttles won't make it past their blockade. They've already taken out the spaceport. Elias turned to her, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers. Then we fight. We're not just going to stand here and die. Fight! Lyra's voice cracked. With what? They have warships. We have what? A few outdated defense drones and some mining lasers. We have ingenuity, Elias shot back. And we have nothing to lose. Before Lyra could respond, a young soldier burst onto the deck, his uniform singed and his face streaked with soot. Captain, they've breached the perimeter. They're heading this way. Elias nodded, his mind already racing through options. Get everyone to the underground bunkers. Now. As the soldier sprinted off, Elias turned back to Lyra. Go with them. You're too valuable to lose. Lyra hesitated, her gaze flickering to the destruction outside. And what about you? I'll buy us some time, Elias said, his voice grim. He reached for the sidearm at his hip, checking the charge. Just keep our people alive. Lyra wanted to argue, to tell him he was being reckless, but the words died on her lips. Instead, she nodded and turned to follow the fleeing crowd. As she disappeared into the chaos, Elias took a deep breath and stepped out into the fray. The streets of Epsilon 9 were a nightmare. Buildings burned, their skeletal frames collapsing under the weight of the Empire's assault. Civilians ran in every direction, their screams drowned out by the relentless barrage from above. Elias moved with purpose, rallying the few soldiers and security personnel who remained. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they were determined. Fall back to the central hub, Elias shouted over the din. We'll make our stand there. The soldiers obeyed without question, their trust in their captain unwavering. Together, they formed a defensive line, using whatever cover they could find. Elias crouched behind a shattered transport vehicle, his sidearm raised as the first wave of Imperial troops appeared. The Empire's soldiers were unlike anything Elias had ever seen. Clad in sleek, black armor that seemed to absorb the light, they moved with an eerie precision, their movements almost mechanical. Their weapons hummed with a deadly energy, and their faces were hidden behind featureless helmets. They were the embodiment of the Empire's cold, unfeeling might. Elias fired, his shot striking one of the soldiers in the chest. The armor absorbed the blast, but the force of the impact sent the soldier stumbling back. It was a small victory, but it was enough to give Elias hope. They weren't invincible. The battle raged on, the humans fighting with a desperation that bordered on madness. They used everything at their disposal: improvised explosives, EMP grenades, even the colony's maintenance drones, to hold the line. For a moment, it seemed like they might actually stand a chance. But then the Empire's commander arrived. She was a towering figure, her armor adorned with intricate designs that marked her as a high-ranking officer. Her voice, amplified by her helmet, cut through the chaos like a knife. Pathetic, she sneered, her gaze sweeping over the defenders. You think your defiance matters? You are nothing but insects to us. Elias stepped forward, his sidearm raised. "We're not afraid of you." The commander tilted her head, as if amused by his bravado. "You should be." With a flick of her wrist, she activated a device on her arm. A pulse of energy erupted from it, slamming into Elias and sending him flying. He hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of him. Around him, the other defenders fell, their weapons slipping from their grasp. The commander strode forward, her boots clicking against the pavement. She stopped in front of Elias, looking down at him with disdain. "Your species is weak," she said. "You have no place in this galaxy." Elias struggled to rise, but his body refused to obey. He could only watch as the commander raised her weapon, its barrel glowing with a deadly light. But before she could fire, a deafening explosion rocked the street. The commander stumbled, her shot going wide. Elias turned his head, his heart pounding as a new figure emerged from the smoke. It was a man, clad in a patchwork of scavenged armor and wielding a massive plasma rifle. His face was hidden behind a cracked helmet, but his voice was unmistakable. "Guess it's open season on aliens," he growled, his tone dripping with venom. The commander recovered quickly, her weapon snapping toward the newcomer. But before she could react, he fired, the blast tearing through her armor and sending her sprawling. Elias stared in disbelief as the man approached, his rifle still smoking. Who are you?" he managed to croak. The man removed his helmet, revealing a rugged face marked by scars and a pair of piercing green eyes. "Name's Jax," he said, offering Elias a hand. "And if you're done lying around, we've got a war to win." Elias took the hand, his mind racing. He didn't know who this man was or where he'd come from, but one thing was clear. The fight for Epsilon 9 was far from over. And if Jax was any indication, humanity might just have a chance after all. As the smoke cleared and the sounds of battle echoed in the distance, Elias felt a spark of hope ignite within him. The Galactic Empire had unleashed hell, but humanity was about to show them what hell truly looked like. The underground bunker was a labyrinth of dimly lit corridors and makeshift barricades, a stark contrast to the vibrant colony that once thrived above. Lyra Chun moved through the chaos with practiced efficiency, her mind racing as she coordinated the evacuation efforts. The survivors huddled together, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion. Children clung to their parents, while the elderly sat in stunned silence, their eyes hollow. Lyra's heart ached for them, but she couldn't afford to dwell on their suffering. "Not now. We need to seal the eastern tunnel," she said to a group of volunteers, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "If the Empire breaches it, we're done for." The volunteers nodded and hurried off, their footsteps echoing in the cramped space. Lyra turned to a nearby console, her fingers flying over the controls as she tried to establish contact with the surface. Static crackled through the speakers, but there was no response. She clenched her teeth, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "Where are you, Elias?" A sudden commotion drew her attention. A group of survivors was arguing near the entrance, their voices rising in panic. Lyra pushed through the crowd, her patience wearing thin. "What's going on?" she demanded. "They're saying we should surrender." One of the survivors, a middle-aged man with a gash on his forehead, said bitterly, "That it's our only chance to survive." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "Surrender?" she repeated, her voice sharp. "To the Empire? Do you really think they'll show us mercy after what they've done?" The man flinched but didn't back down. "What choice do we have? We can't fight them. They're too powerful." Before Lyra could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "We don't need to fight them head-on. We just need to outthink them." Lyra turned to see Jax standing at the edge of the crowd, his plasma rifle slung over his shoulder. His presence was commanding, his scarred face and piercing green eyes drawing the attention of everyone in the room. The survivors fell silent, their fear momentarily replaced by curiosity. "Who are you?" the man asked, his tone wary. "Someone who's been fighting the Empire longer than you've been running from them," Jax replied, his voice calm but laced with an edge of steel. "And if you want to live, you'll listen to what I have to say." Lyra stepped forward, her gaze locking with Jax's. "What's your plan?" Jax's lips curved into a faint smirk. "First, we need to stop panicking. The Empire's got us cornered, but they're not invincible. They rely on fear to keep people in line. Take that away, and they're just bullies with fancy toys." "And how do you propose we do that?" Lyra asked, crossing her arms. "By hitting them where it hurts," Jax said, his smirk widening. "Their pride." He gestured for Lyra to follow him, and she did, her curiosity outweighing her skepticism. They moved to a quieter corner of the bunker, where Jax spread out a holographic map of the colony. The surface was a patchwork of red and blue markers, indicating Imperial positions and human defenses. Or what was left of them. "The Empire's commander is here," Jax said, pointing to a cluster of red markers near the central hub. "She's the one calling the shots. Take her out, and their forces will be in disarray." Lyra frowned. "Even if we could get to her, how do you expect to take down someone like that? She's got an entire battalion protecting her." Jax's smirk turned into a grin. "That's where you come in, Document. I've heard about your work with EMP technology." Lyra opened her mouth to argue, but the determination in Jax's eyes stopped her. He wasn't just throwing out ideas. He believed in this plan. And for the first time since the attack began, Lyra felt a flicker of hope. "Fine," she said, exhaling sharply. "But I'll need help. And materials." Jax nodded. "You'll have whatever you need. Just make it fast." Over the next few hours, Lyra worked tirelessly, her mind racing as she pieced together the components of the EMP device. She scavenged parts from the bunker systems, repurposing everything from power conduits to communication relays. The survivors watched in awe as she worked, their fear slowly giving way to a fragile sense of purpose. Meanwhile, Jax rallied the remaining defenders, his presence inspiring a newfound determination in them. He moved among them like a force of nature, his confidence infectious. "We're not just fighting for our lives," he told them, his voice carrying through the bunker. "We're fighting for our future, for every human who's ever been pushed down by the Empire. This is our chance to show them we're not afraid." By the time Lyra finished the EMP device, the survivors had transformed from a frightened mob into a determined resistance. The device was crude but functional, its core glowing with a faint blue light. Lyra handed it to Jax, her hands trembling slightly. "It's ready, but it's a one-time use. You'll have to make it count." Jax took the device, his expression serious. "I will." The plan was simple but risky. Jax and a small team would infiltrate the central hub, using the chaos of the battle to get close to the Empire's commander. Once in position, they would activate the EMP, disabling the commander's armor and giving Jax the opening he needed to take her down. As they prepared to leave the bunker, Lyra caught Jax's arm. "Be careful," she said, her voice soft but firm. "We're counting on you." Jax met her gaze, his green eyes steady. "I won't let you down." The infiltration was a blur of tension and adrenaline. Jax and his team moved like shadows through the ruined streets, their every step calculated to avoid detection. The Empire's forces were everywhere, their black armor gleaming in the firelight. But Jax's experience and instincts kept them one step ahead. When they finally reached the central hub, the commander was there, her presence commanding even amidst the chaos. Jax's grip tightened on the EMP device as he signaled his team to take their positions. This was it. The EMP pulse was blinding, a burst of energy that rippled through the air and sent the Empire's soldiers stumbling. The commander's armor flickered and died, leaving her vulnerable. Jax didn't hesitate. He moved in, his plasma rifle aimed true. The fight was brutal but brief. The commander was skilled, her movements precise even without her armor. But Jax was relentless, his every strike fueled by a lifetime of rage and defiance. When the final blow landed, the commander fell, her body crumpling to the ground. The Empire's forces, now leaderless, began to falter. Jax's team seized the opportunity, pushing back with everything they had. The tide of the battle shifted, the humans fighting with a ferocity that stunned their enemies. As the sun rose over the ruined colony, the survivors emerged from the bunker, their faces filled with awe and relief. Jax stood amidst the wreckage, his chest heaving as he surveyed the battlefield. They had won. For now. Lyra approached him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "You did it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jax shook his head. We did it. But as the survivors celebrated, Jax's gaze turned to the horizon, where the Empire's warships still loomed. This was just the beginning. The Empire would come back, stronger and angrier than before. And when they did, humanity would be ready. The fight for Epsilon 9 was over. But the war for the galaxy had only just begun. The victory at Epsilon 9 was a spark in the darkness, a fleeting moment of triumph that ignited hope across the scattered remnants of humanity. But as the survivors gathered amidst the ruins of the colony, the weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily on their shoulders. The Galactic Empire would not let this defiance go unanswered. Their retribution would be swift and merciless. And yet, for the first time, humanity had a weapon more powerful than any plasma rifle or starship. Unity. Jax stood at the edge of the central hub, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the Empire's warships had retreated. The scars of battle were etched into the landscape, the ground scorched and littered with debris. Behind him, the survivors worked tirelessly to fortify their position, their movements fueled by a mixture of exhaustion and determination. Lyra Chun moved among them, her mind already racing with plans for the next phase of their resistance. She had proven herself indispensable, her ingenuity turning the tide of the battle. But even she knew that their victory was fragile, a temporary reprieve in a war that was far from over. "They'll be back," Jax said, his voice low but carrying an edge of certainty. He turned to Lyra, who had approached him with a data pad in hand. "And next time they won't hold back." Lyra nodded, her expression grim. "I know, but we're not the same as we were before. We've shown them we can fight, and we've shown ourselves." Jax's lips curved into a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You've got that fire in you, document. I like it." Lyra ignored the comment, her focus unwavering. "We need to prepare. The EMP device worked, but it was a one-time trick. We need something more sustainable, something that can give us an edge." Jax raised an eyebrow. "You got something in mind?" "Maybe," Lyra said, her tone cautious. "But it's risky, and it'll take time." "Time's the one thing we don't have," Jax replied, his gaze returning to the horizon. "But if anyone can pull it off, it's you." Before Lyra could respond, a shout drew their attention. A group of survivors was gathered around a makeshift comm station, their faces lit with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. Jax and Lyra exchanged a glance before hurrying over. "What's going on?" Jax demanded. One of the survivors, a young woman with a bandage wrapped around her arm, turned to him. "We're picking up signals from other colonies. They've heard about what happened here. They're fighting back." Jax's eyes narrowed. "Fighting back how?" The woman handed him a data pad, the screen filled with fragmented messages and reports. Jax scanned the information, his expression hardening with each word. Across the galaxy, human colonies were rising up against the Empire, their defiance sparked by the victory at Epsilon 9. But the reports were grim. The Empire's response was brutal, their forces crushing any resistance with overwhelming force. "They're dying out there," Jax said, his voice tight with anger. "And we're sitting here, waiting for the next attack." Lyra placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him. "We can't help them if we're dead. We need to focus on our own survival first." Jax shook his head. "Survival isn't enough. Not anymore. We need to strike back. Hard." Lyra hesitated, her mind racing. She knew Jax was right, but the risks were immense. Still, the fire in his eyes was impossible to ignore. "What are you thinking?" she asked. Jax's smile returned, this time with a dangerous edge. "I'm thinking it's time we take the fight to them." The plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal. Jax proposed a direct assault on an Imperial supply depot located on a nearby moon. The depot was a critical hub for the Empire's operations in the sector, and destroying it would deal a significant blow to their war effort. But it was heavily fortified, with a garrison of elite soldiers and a fleet of warships guarding it. "It's a death wish," one of the survivors said, his voice trembling. "We'll never make it." Jax's gaze swept over the group, his presence commanding. "Maybe, but if we don't try, we're already dead. The Empire won't stop until every last one of us is crushed. This is our chance to show them we're not afraid. To show the galaxy that humanity won't go down without a fight." The survivors exchanged uneasy glances, but one by one, they nodded. They had nothing left to lose. The assault on the supply depot was a blur of chaos and carnage. Jax led the charge, his plasma rifle blazing as he cut through the Empire's forces with ruthless efficiency. Lyra was by his side, her EMP device modified into a portable weapon that disabled enemy armor and weapons with each pulse. The survivors fought with a ferocity born of desperation, their every move fueled by the knowledge that failure meant extinction. But the Empire was not easily defeated. Their soldiers were disciplined and relentless, their weapons cutting through the human forces with terrifying precision. The depot's defenses were formidable, their turrets and drones raining down destruction on the attackers. For every step forward, the humans paid a heavy price. As they neared the depot's core, Jax and Lyra found themselves facing the Empire's commander, a towering figure clad in black armor. His presence was overwhelming, his every movement radiating power and menace. Jax didn't hesitate. He charged forward, his rifle blazing, but the commander was faster. A single blow sent Jax sprawling, his weapon skittering out of reach. Lyra stepped forward, her EMP device raised, but the commander swatted it aside like a toy. He loomed over her, his voice a low growl. "You are nothing," he said. "Your defiance is meaningless." But as he raised his weapon to strike, a shot rang out. The commander staggered, his armor cracking under the impact. Jax stood behind him, his rifle smoking, his eyes blazing with defiance. "We're not nothing," he said, his voice steady. "We're humanity." The commander fell, his body crumpling to the ground. The depot's core was within reach. Lyra activated the EMP device, its pulse overloading the core systems. The depot erupted in a blinding explosion, its destruction sending shockwaves through the moon's surface. As the survivors regrouped, their faces lit by the glow of the burning depot, Jax and Lyra stood side by side, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. They had won, again, but the cost had been high. "They'll come for us," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Harder than ever." Jax nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Let them come. We'll be ready." And as the survivors prepared for the next battle, a single thought burned in their hearts. The Empire had unleashed hell, but humanity had responded with fire, and the galaxy would never be the same.